I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
I'm a surgeon, not a psychiatrist.
All right, I had a conversation with some young men the other day that were talking about going to medical school. Now, one thing we've noticed is that enrollment for medical school in America seems to have been going down, especially for young men. And we're just trying to figure out what the reason is, to the point that you're seeing a lot of medical schools doing a lot of heavy recruiting, trying to get young men in, especially men of color, like African American men, to go to medical schools. They're just not going. Now, a question that I've always had, because I have some doctors in my family and friends, I wanted to know, like, really, what's the big difference between, let's say, going to med school abroad or going to med school in America? And I know that America, people think it's kind of like cream of the crop when it comes to education and everything, but wondering really what's the real deal? Classic example, probably about 50, 60 years ago, my mother told me about a cousin we had who went to school in Germany, went to med school in Germany, and he did fine. He went to med school in Germany, came back, took the boards, and practiced in America. Now, probably what most people are thinking, that it's much cheaper overseas. Remember, before the whole Ukraine war, everybody was going to med school in Ukraine, in Russia, and these places. The African students are going to schools there. And then when they would come and practice in America, like, they would be pretty reputable doctors, even if they do go to some foreign med schools. So the whole thing is, do med schools in America hold the same weight as they did before? Like, is it the same, is it the same as it was before? Are they going down or are they going up? Now, a lot of people are thinking med school, they're thinking about the bills, how much it costs. In the past, most people would just go ahead and take loans out and figure out, well, they'll pay with it, with the high salaries they get later on. But when you start talking about med schools running as much as $300, $400, $500,000 in debt before you even start your first job, that's a lot for a young man or a young woman coming into the world with all that debt behind their shoulders, hoping that they would be able to make enough money to pay those debts off. Now, when you start talking about med professions that pay a lot of money, such as cardiology, such as dermatology, these are high-paying med fields that that you could pay those loans back in no time. But the question I always ask is that, how are these young doctors able to start life with all this debt on top of them? Which is a serious question. Now, here there are some options to go to medical school for free. I know in the 60s, some of my family members did what they call the ROTC, which means they went to the Army, and then the Army paid for med school. And when they came out of med school, then they were able to practice, medicine in the Army for a certain amount of years, and then they left and went into private practice. This could be an option if you want to come out of school debt-free. And, you're definitely going to get a residency, and you don't have to pay for anything. And you're going to get experience. I mean, you're in the Army. And so I've seen some people do that, where they've done what they call Army ROTC, where that's what they've done. Now, one of the turnoffs as well for med school in America is that to come to med school, you have to do 4 years of undergrad, and then you have to go to med school. Whereas in other countries, you're going straight to med school. All right? You're going straight to med school, and then after 6 years, whatever it is, then you're a doctor. As opposed to here, you're doing 4 years of undergrad and 4 to 5 years of med school. By the time you get out, I mean, you're going to have gray hairs. And I think what's happening with a lot of the young people, they're just not interested in being in school that long. So I think for the med school, for the medicine profession to really thrive, they're going to have to make some changes to try to attract more people. Because if you're talking about young people that are going into school at 18 and you're telling them that they'll be in their profession by the time they turn 28, a lot of them aren't even thinking that far. They can't even think till next week. What you're also noticing, that there's a trend of a lot of young Americans, they're going to school overseas. They're going to Belgium and these other places, and going to Germany for med school because, first of all, it's less time. Second, they don't want to pay all that money. And I can't blame them. So the question is the quality of med school, is it better or worse? Because we've seen some competent doctors come from some third world countries and are excellent doctors. And they were able to go to med school for not that much money. All right. But of course, America is where the big money is. Now, how does this translate to the international student? The international student is thinking, I want to be a doctor and I want to go to school in America. But he has to understand that he's going to have to do 4 years and then go on to med school. You know, we have this thing here that's called pre-medicine. You always see in America pre-medicine, pre-law, pre-pharmacy. You know, that's basically, it is what it is. It's pre. These are the classes in the curriculum you're taking until you get to that level. Then you got to pass the MCAT to get a good score on that. I mean, it's a headache. So how can we make this medical profession more appealing to youngsters? So, and that's a whole nother question. But like I said, what is the better value? You know, if you're able to go to med school, let's say in Croatia, and then you take the medicine boards and you come to America and you're able to practice, you save yourself some money, you save yourself some time, and you are going to hopefully a pretty reputable med school. You know, is it hard getting residencies? It depends. I know, for example, the state of California, it's a little bit more lenient in terms of, you know, getting a California medical license from different countries, where other countries maybe, where other states may be a little harder. So I think it all depends on where you want to practice as well. California's pretty liberal and they're open to that. So if you're a young student and you're looking, you know, into medicine, these are the same questions I asked myself when I was looking for my own children to go to medical school. I was thinking, hey, maybe they should go to school overseas. Maybe we should look at some other options. You know, there are other options that are out there. So it'd be nice to hear from some med students overseas and some med schools in America. What do they think about this topic? Because I think that there's a lot of brainwashing going on. One time I asked a question in a forum of American students, and they were like, "Oh no, it's not this. You know, it's much more." And I just really wasn't convinced from them. Like, is there a difference between? Of course, there's always going to be tiers of med schools, but we're talking about the training. Are these students coming over? These junior doctors coming over to America, and are they able to compete at the highest level with some of the doctors here? All right, because some of my doctors, they didn't go to med school in America. I mean, they went to med school, you know, in Iraq and India and Croatia and Philippines, and they're pretty good doctors. All right. Now, maybe this is going to be a way that America is able to fill in the void for doctors that we have, because the youngsters just are not going to med school. It's simply not happening. All right. They're not going to med school. When you tell them about that many years of school, these kids, they're not even thinking about it. So that's the main question I want to put to some of my followers and some of my listeners. Is there a major difference between the foreign med schools and the American med schools when it comes to practicing? So if somebody goes to Bombay Medical School, for example, and then he comes to America, takes the board, he passes the boards, then he comes to America, and then he's able to practice. I mean, will he receive a lower salary? Are they just as equipped or more equipped than the American doctors? Is the American med school the top of the food chain? Or is it just prestige to say you went to med school in America, as opposed to saying you went to med school in Lahore, Pakistan, or in Casablanca, Morocco? So these are definitely some things that we like to talk about. Another thing is, like, notice a lot of medical schools, they do have English medium in these med schools where some don't. So I guess probably some of the things might be a language barrier. But even like in universities like Egypt and these places, I mean, all the teachers speak in English and they're teaching English. So that's a very interesting question. I knew somebody who was paying for $2,500 a year for med school, and he took the boards, came to America, practiced, doing fine. Also took the boards for Canada, was fine. All right, so that's something we need to look at, and something that you need to look at. Do you want to go and do the traditional 4 years in America and then go to med school and pay all that money and get in a lot of debt? Now, mind you, we're not even talking about the debt from undergrad, provided you didn't get a scholarship. So if you're going to undergrad and you have an undergrad bill of about 150, 200,000, probably more, and then you have to go to medical school and you got a bill of 300 to 400,000, who's going to pay all that off? All right. Now, I did notice that there was a med school in Cuba. The Cuban government has a program where they take American students, primarily students of color, minority students, and they go to med school in Cuba for free. But what they have to do is that they have to promise when they come back to America, they have to practice in impoverished communities, in poor communities. And then they have a a medical degree. Now, I've talked to some doctors, including some of my family members that are doctors, and they say that the Cuban doctors and the Cuban medical system is pretty good. Like, it's nothing to sleep on. So it's going to be interesting to see in the future what's going to happen if we start getting if we start getting less and less and less young doctors. What are we going to do to fill those voids in America? And what does that mean overseas? When overseas doctors come to America, I guess they're thinking when they go back to their home country that, they're going to be top of the food chain. Or maybe they're not thinking about going to their country. Maybe they're thinking about, staying in America, especially if you're from a country that is having like a lot of turmoil. People figure like, hey, maybe I can come here. Because a doctor in Cuba still not getting a lot of money. So let's look at that. We'll talk about that in the future. These are just some questions that I wanted to pose to my students and to my friends and anybody else who's watching this. Questions, comments, short speeches. Let me know what you think about this. This is something that's been on my chest for a while, and people have been asking me that. I have a friend whose kids are in med school in the Bahamas and other places, some in med school in the West Indies. I know some Pakistani nationals that actually went to med school in Dominican Republic. So, it is happening. It's been happening for years. But the question is, what are the benefits? And what are the drawbacks of that? Even China. The Chinese medical schools are inviting people from all over the world to come there and study at a fraction of the cost that it would be in America. And not just med school, other schools, other disciplines as well. Take a look at that. Let me know what you think about it. Questions, comments, short speeches on the bottom. Subscribe, click. Let me know what you think. Thank you.